Hey, I'm Shannon Holton, real salty dietitian and owner of Sound Growth Nutrition and Wellness, a pediatric nutrition practice here in Eastern North Carolina. Today, I want to talk a little bit about research. You might wonder why I'm covering kind of a general topic like research, and that is because nutrition is a science, not an opinion. We'll cover 4 key points that are helpful in interpreting research and understanding research for those of you who are on social media and you often hear the comment, do your research, or I've done my research. We'll look at the components of a research article that are important for you to understand to make sure that what you're saying is true. We'll also look at some definitions of some terms and terminology to make sure that you understand the words that you're saying when you do that research. The first key point is looking at sample size. It really is important to know whether you had 10 people in a study that said one thing or whether you had 300 people in a study that said something. If you have a population, for example, of 500 people in a community, if you only research 10 of those people, it would not be a very good representative sample. If you research 300 of those 500 people, that would be a pretty darn good sample. The second thing you want to look at is your sample population. What is the focus group? Was it a group of people in Hawaii, a group of people in the Midwest? Was it different people of racial, ethnic, or religious backgrounds? Because that's going to help you to understand whether or not the research will apply across different states, across different regions, whether it is relevant to the whole country or the whole world or all of those things. How are the results measured? Did they use surveys? Did they measure something like a height or a weight or age? Those kinds of things give different validity. If it's a survey and you're asking for people to remember information from 2 weeks ago, that's not going to be as reliable as something that you can actually measure. It also isn't as reliable as a survey that perhaps was validated, meaning that they used a survey that other researchers have used in other studies. So those kinds of surveys would be more valid than a survey that is trying to get you to remember something you did 2 weeks ago. The last thing would be, what other things may have affected the results? You might be trying to tie 2 things together. You could be trying to tie vegetable consumption with a group of people or population. But there's always other things that can impact it. If we're trying to do a study that says that fruit and vegetable consumption is dependent upon where you live, you might have to look at other things like, what is the income level of the people that were in the study? What are the cultural food habits of the people in that study? So it's not always just direct, this is this. It's a lot of times what other things could have influenced that outcome, or what other things could have made the results of the study what they were. Next, we'll look at some terminology. So the first thing to know is the word variable. Then often in research, you'll hear about the variables. Those are the things that you're studying. With a group of people would be a variable. The behavior or the measurement that you're trying to get is the other variable. When you look at the 3 types of outcomes, you hear the words association, you hear the words causation, and you hear the words correlation. They can be kind of tied together, but it's important to know that there's a difference. If a research says associated with, that means something different than causes or correlated. So association just means that information about the people, one variable, tells you something about the behavior or the measure that you're taking. It tells you about it. It doesn't mean that one causes the other. It just means that when you look at the big picture, it seems like there is a connection. So an example of that would be the connection between, let's say you did a study and it said that children in 2-parent homes eat more fresh vegetables. Well, that's an association. It doesn't mean that because there's 2 parents in the house that you eat more fresh vegetables. Again, there's lots of other factors that could have caused that. Income level, where they live, etc. Causation is the hardest thing to determine. You have to have lots of studies with lots of results. The type of design of the study tells you if you can say causation. That is when you actually prove that something causes something. So recently, the association of processed or smoked meats has been said to cause an increased risk of certain cancers. That prior to was an association. It's important to have that in mind because a lot of people jump to, oh my gosh, this causes this. But realistically, it takes a very long time and a lot of research studies to actually prove that something causes something. Correlation is the last one, and it means that the two variables follow a pattern. So, for example, you might see popsicle intake goes up as the temperature increases. And so on a graph, they go together like this. Or you might see that fruit intake increases when candy intake decreases. So there is a relationship there and it follows a pattern. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the popsicle intake causes the increased temperature or the increased temperature causes the popsicle intake. There's a lot of other factors that can be involved. The type of study is important too to understand whether or not it's valid. For example, the best studies are what's called prospective, meaning that researchers identified some of these ideas floating around about associations and wanted to research if there was a bigger connection. So a prospective trial means that researchers came up with the idea, they planned it all out in advance, they recruited people to participate, and then they broke down the information. Retrospective is very common in a lot of healthcare settings because a health record or a population of people that are coming on a regular basis to your office is a wide open sample size. And it's tempting a lot of times to go back and look at information that was already collected and try to make a connection. Those are a little tricky. If you see a study that wants to prove your point when you go on social media to tell somebody that you need to do your research, it's important to see was it retrospective, because that sometimes can go down the slippery slope of data mining, meaning researchers trying to find a connection that they want to find. And that in general is what all of us try to do. I know that when people do their search engine research, you can almost always find something to prove your point. You can always find something that will tell somebody else and say, I read online that this happens. You can find information that will validate your opinion no matter what. So it's important to look at actual research and go beyond reading the title that gives you a feeling of what they're trying to say and mean, and to really understand that you have to know the sample size, you have to know the population it came from, you have to know how it was measured, and what other things affected it. You have to know if they're saying that they're associating those two things or if they're saying that there's a correlation in those two things. And you have to know whether they planned for the study and built that from the ground up, or if they took data that they were digging through charts and finding information to pull together to try to verify their hypothesis. So that is my quick 10-minute review on how to do research. I can post a quickie with some bullet points. So stay tuned for the Truth on Tuesday is what I'll call it, where I'll talk a little bit more about my business and the journey that I've been on up to this point, and kind of some of the barriers that I see that might be helpful for other people and also might give me some insight as I talk through it. Look forward to talking with you next week, and have a great weekend.